Slater, is that a quilt behind you? I should have asked you earlier, but I'm looking at the wall and I like it.
It is. Thank you. Yeah, it's very nice, very quilty. It's from my partner's aunt, I think, makes them.
Oh, nice. I like it a lot.
Thanks.
All right, so we are here. Perfect. And we've already got 75 people tuning in, which is amazing. So attendees, it is great to see you, or I guess see your number on the bottom left of my screen. But it is great to see you, virtually here. A few kind of quick housekeeping items, and I promise I will jump stage because some of you have already seen my face before and know what I'm going to say by the time we get to Thursday. But please use that chat bar over to your right. Drop your LinkedIn. Feel free to intro yourself. Feel free to tell people what you are here for and who you are looking to network with. If we were in person, some of you know this, but I would make you stand up and shake each other's hands and intro yourself there. So this is my way of virtually making you, go and network with one another. So I will throw my LinkedIn there as well momentarily, but I would love to connect with you. But definitely feel free to go and post your info on who you are looking to connect with. Also, join here in addition to, making new connections. We're also here to make sure that you guys have answers. So please use that Q&A tab over to the far right and bombard our speakers with all of your questions. Put them on the spot. I like that. Ask away. Really, like the main reasons behind Startup Week and why us volunteers created this was 1, to help you get connections, and 2, to help you get answers. So definitely abuse the Q&A tab over to the far right. If you are looking to be in a different type of session right now and you're not looking to, figure out how to be the best CEO as possible for your startup, then please click the agenda tab at the top and that will show you what else is happening right now. And last but not least, we are running a fun social media raffle. So what you need to do is you need to note down any quotes that are currently happening during the session, post it on your social media platform, use that hashtag SBW2021. I almost forgot what year it was, 2021. And then you will be entered to win one of 5 $100 gift cards to a Black-owned Boston-based business. So go share those quotes. Who doesn't want free stuff? The businesses are amazing. You can check them out in the help desk tab at the top to see those businesses that we are supporting. Okay, guys. Well, I'm going to jump because you're not here for me. So I'm going to turn the imaginary mic over to Zach. And Zach, please take it from here.
It's really great to be with you guys. We have a wonderful discussion involving you and our great panelists. I'll give you a quick overview of what to expect, and then I'll guide us through. So essentially, I'm Zach Breaker. I'm the CEO of Refine and Focus, an innovation and marketing consultancy here in Boston. I was drawn to this panel because I really like conversations where it involves self-reflection, ideation, and understanding yourself in order to improve. And this is a conversation I think that does all that for a CEO. So I'd like to ask each of our panelists, starting with Slater, then Greg, then Michelle, then Jennifer, just to take a minute and kind of introduce themselves very quickly and what drew you to this conversation. Then I'll ask some questions of our entrepreneurs, some questions of our investors, and some questions for all. While I'm doing this, feel free to ask your questions as well, but we're going to have a great discussion. So Slater, Greg, Michelle, and Jennifer, if you could go in that order with just a very brief bio and what brought you to this conversation in particular, then I'll start the questions.
Excellent. So my name is Slater Victoroff. I'm the CTO and founder of Indico Data Solutions, a Boston-based company. I was particularly interested in this conversation because I lived through this, right? Before I was the CTO of Indico, I was the CEO of Indico, as Michelle well knows. And I think that there were, it was a very interesting experience communicating that to folks and going through that. And I think that it's kind of a topic that a lot of people won't talk very openly about. So, be the change you want to see.
Great. Awesome. My name is Greg Reyes. I'm managing director for Techstars Boston. Prior to Techstars, I ran my own business in Boston called Reyes Labs. I was the CEO for about 15 years. I sold the business in late 2017 and took on other innovation roles in the company. I think the thing that drew me to this conversation is that being CEO is incredibly hard. A lot of founders don't necessarily realize how difficult and challenging that role is. And it's only going through that process and talking and mentoring and working with a lot of entrepreneurs that you see strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for people to really be their best selves. And sometimes that's at different stages of the company that may be the CEO and it may not be. And so just recognizing that both about yourself and about the stage of your company, I think is important.
Thank you.
Hi all, Michelle Gouveia. I am an investor at Sandbox Industries. It's a Chicago-based venture capital firm focused on investments in healthcare, sustainability, and insurtech. I was drawn to this topic in this panel, particularly because when it was described to me, as Slater mentioned, we have experience in having invested in a company, Indico, that did go through that transition, but across the firm, we have a number of examples and experience in seeing CEO transitions occur across our portfolio. And because we're stage agnostic investors, we see it at all stages of companies. So being able to share the background and the perspective from the investor side to help CEOs kind of think through how those conversations need to happen was particularly interesting for me.
And Jennifer, if you could go, that would be great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm Jennifer Mendoza. I'm co-founder and general partner at Mendoza Ventures. We work with a lot of startups from pre-seed through B. And like Michelle, we're going through this. And I think one of the things that really drew me to talking about this more publicly is that being the CEO of a startup is like a Cinderella story for boys. And I think that it's actually a very coachable skill set that people don't talk openly enough about. And so I'm excited to do that today.
Wonderful. Now it's your guys' turn. If you just take 10 seconds and go into the chat window and let us know why you're here, that would be really wonderful as well, because we want you to feel included in the conversation. So just take a quick second, let us know why you're here, and that would be great. Now I'm going to ask questions first to Greg and Slater, but this also, Jennifer and Michelle, you are very much invited if something sparks and you want to contribute. But the first set of questions to Greg and Slater first, and then of course Michelle and Jennifer, very invited to them. So to you guys, when was the moment that you realized that the company might benefit from a transition from you maybe leaving the role as a CEO? Was it a moment? Can you kind of take us to that time?
Yeah, it was, I think, interesting for me because I think there were two very distinct moments. And actually one was immediately after Indico raised our first seed round. So we came out of Techstars, right? And I think the key realization that I had was that, and I think this is the really, really hard part, was that it wasn't that I could not be the CEO. It's that I would never be as good of a CEO as I would be a CTO, right? And I had this kind of fundamental recognition of myself. But then what happened was, you kind of announced that to people. I went out to our investors and I'm like, hey, I don't think it's best for Indico if I'm the CEO. And we just kind of raised this round. Everyone just freaks out, right? Everyone loses it. We had, I think, some folks that were advisors that I think, otherwise were really helpful. But, on this particular subject, I had folks coming out. It's like, oh, just because you're stepping out of the CEO role, Slater, like, don't make it feel like you failed. I'm like, well, I didn't feel that way at all until you just framed it like that, right? And there was just tons of that all over the place. So basically, for all of those reasons, I'm like, okay, clearly now is not the right time to do it. I took a step back. I'm like, all right, I'll be CEO. And honestly, it was fine, right? I did well as CEO, and Indico performed decently, right? And it would have been like in VC terms, it would have been a nice single, right? We could have just hit that, but we kind of came to the same decision point again a couple of years later, and it was again, hey, we built this to something nice sized. We could kind of pack this up, go home. It might be fun, but if I shifted over to the CTO role, right, where I could go from being, just very, like good CEO to one of the best CTOs in the world, and then we can get a CEO to match that, right? Indico can go so much further, right? And that was really the recognition. And it's not a small and simple thing. And, you know, I think this is also maybe where Indico is a little bit strange, is our investors absolutely were not pushing for this. I was pushing for it because it was the right thing for the company.
Slater, 10-second follow-up question before we go to Greg is, how did you handle those messages that were suggesting that you failed? Like, how did you respond to that? How did you learn how to navigate that space?
You know, I think that in hindsight, so at the time, I, you know, compensated poorly by saying, all right, you know, I won't do it because it makes these people feel like I failed. Right. In hindsight, I think the people that viewed it as a failure were the advisors that were not actually helpful. There was a really, really direct correlation there. Right. And so I would just say, I wish I had been a lot more aggressive about working only with the partners that understood what was best for me and the company.
Wonderful. Greg, love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't necessarily an event or a trigger or anything like that. Like, for me, there's a number of different stages for a company and for growth. And I'd taken the business from what's traditionally called 0 to 1. You know, we were from nothing to, we were doing revenue, we were hiring, we were closing contracts. And we'd gotten to about 70, 80 people doing about $1 million a month. And, you know, for me personally, the business started to be less fun. Meaning that it became a lot more operational and about scale. Those are things that I could absolutely continue to be the CEO and operate in that way and think operationally and how do you scale and how do you go to the next level. But kind of everyone has their sweet spot or the thing they think they're kind of best at. You know, I often say, like, I want people to bring their best self to work. And what I realized about myself is, like, I enjoy being in the early and being in the ideation and exploration and the build it and the 0 to 1. And I can absolutely handle and do some of the things, but I started to bring in other talented executives and have conversations. And honestly, it started to be like, well, there are people who are both passionate, interested, and experienced on the, call it 10 to 100 or public company scale. I do think there's elements of that are fun and enjoyable, but for the particular space that I was in, and again, this was very personal, I was like, I wanted to go do something else. I wanted to be less on that particular treadmill and explore other areas of myself. Again, I think it's important for me individually. I also had all of my eggs in that particular basket of that company. I think it's also kind of a personal risk for CEOs as well. You know, if that company had an issue, if it failed, like, literally that was 15 years of my life. That was everything. And so at different points in your life, you have different risk tolerance and risk profiles. And I talk about this with a lot of CEOs. Like, are you at the right stage in your life to do a startup, to have a high degree of risk or not? And again, that changes depending on your job, depending on your finances. You know, I see a lot of entrepreneurs who they haven't figured out some of their own personal finances and they have personal finance troubles. That's not necessarily the best place to be mentally, emotionally, financially, to do something that puts additional financial burden and stress. And so, you know, I think that those are all important considerations if you're thinking, like, is this the right time and place for me to sit in that chair of leadership and opportunity and growth? And again, that does change from month to month, year to year for individuals that should consider that.
Just a micro quick follow-up. I heard less fun. Was that a litmus test for you, or is that something that kind of helped you clarify whether the CEO role was right or not? Less fun, or was something different?
Yeah, I mean, look, being a CEO is really hard. And so, you know, there are going to be not fun things every day, regardless of the stage of the company that you're in. But, you know, at a certain larger scale, at least for me personally, I found it was a lot more operational and firefighting and dealing with problems of the business rather than dreaming and aspirationally engineering and building the things. Like, again, some people really enjoy that. So it's not a good or bad thing. Like, I was personally like, this is, I remember having like, I'm the CEO, but I can't quit right? And then I was like, well, like there are transitions that the company can make. You should be thinking long-term succession planning as a executive anyways. And it was kind of that mindset of like, if I'm not having fun, it's probably not good for the business either. And so then that led to well, okay, how could we do this differently?
Great. I'm going to keep on asking our entrepreneurs questions, but Senator Michelle, if you have something quickly to interject, you're welcome. And if not, I'll come back to you very shortly.
I just have one. Go ahead, Senator.
No, go for it. Go for it, Michelle.
I was just going to say a little bit back to what Slater was talking about. I think from the investor perspective, when you're investing in a company, a venture stage company, a big part of what you're looking at and what you're investing in is the team, right? And during the diligence process, we spend a lot of time getting to know the team. What is your goal personally for the business? What is your goal for the business in the industry as a whole? And then hopefully those things, align for what is laid out as a business plan or a model. But having those conversations early on, and then as you're hitting milestones or scaling the business, you keep touching back to those things. We want to be an enterprise software solution. Who's the right person to lead those conversations with the sales team, or to have the relationships, or who knows the industry that you can come into? And so there maybe becomes a natural conversation that happens where you say, this is what you wanted for the business. It's what we wanted. Are we able to execute the best, or do we execute better if these things happened? And so, Slater, to your point of, I was doing great as a CEO. I thought I could do better as a CTO, and let's find in the right person to complement my technological skill set with the skill set to articulate an enterprise, solution to customers that are buying it from a business perspective. And so those are all things that for us, we spend a lot of time with the team, getting to know them, and then hopefully those conversations, you feel like you have a partner as you're trying to make those decisions and work through and navigate.
And Michelle, just a micro follow-up before going to Senator. Mm-hmm. How common is it that a CEO will, on his or her or on their own, realize that they're not best in that role? I mean, is what Slater's mentioning to you something in your experience? And of course, I'd love to hear yours as well, Senator. But is that common that someone would come to that conclusion on their own?
I don't have like statistics or actual numbers. I think it depends on what kind of business you're running and what kind of background you bring to it, right? Like a technical founder is different than, an entrepreneurial founder that's had, or an entrepreneur that's on their sixth business and has done a bunch of different industries and maybe makes the decision that this isn't the right one for them versus their experience. It really depends. It's not, there's no clear signals during diligence or in conversations that you can pick early on that would be the scenario. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer to your question, but I think, again, it starts off with that partnership and understanding the vision for the business. And then whether it's coming from that person that wants to make the transition, or from a board, which we can get into after, but I know you've got a question on that. It's not an easy decision as a board to make that decision either. I think it really just depends.
Thank you. Senator, I'd love to hear from you. Senator, are you able to hear me okay?
I was just going to say, you can look at public companies and see examples of this as well, like whether it's the Ubers, where the board's like, hey, you're not going to work out as the CEO, to executives of public companies like Jeff Bezos stepping down from Amazon and saying, hey, it's time for me to move on, or the CEO of Microsoft saying it's time for me to move on. You see, I think there's a lot of variability, from boards saying, hey, Steve Jobs, it's not the right time for you to be the CEO of Apple, to entrepreneurs and founders coming to that conclusion themselves.
Wonderful. Any other comments here before I go to asking Slater and Greg the follow-up question? So Slater and Greg, you made this decision, you came to this realization. What happened next?
We went out, we found an executive recruiter. I think another thing often that I find, especially with young entrepreneurs, it's important to realize that if you want someone at like an appropriate skill level to like come and take over as CEO, you kind of have to have something worthwhile to give them, right? And have to have enough to kind of attract the sort of talent you're looking for. So that actually was a really, really big piece of this, actually, is sort of like crafting, kind of all of the great technology that we had built at Indico, working with the executive recruiter to then think through like, okay, who is going to be, the exact right profile of CEO who's going to complement this really well. So it was a very, lot of range finding. It was not something I had done before. 406, who, were our partners there, then still our partners now, right? They had a lot more experience, but, I met with a whole bunch of CEOs and it took months to find the person and get the timing right and, get all the packages correct. But, it was absolutely worth it, I would say. I had another friend that did it at the same time. And, I think he rushed the process a little bit. And he was maybe a little bit too egotistical in how he went about it. He like really, really wanted to have it his way. And it didn't work out so great for the company, right? And I think that because we had such an open, conversation where we were all really on the same side of the table trying to do what was best for the company, I think that's a lot of why the process worked out well. But also, again, it took 6 to 9 months probably. And it was a lot of work through that whole time to just really make sure we knew what was best.
Quick follow-up, Slater. Is there a spectrum of egotistical and the right amount to be? I mean, like can you kind of unpack that a little bit for me?
Yeah, there is absolutely a spectrum, and the right amount of ego to have is none. I think that it's like the number one issue actually I see with startup founders, right? And there's a really important difference, I think, between ego and confidence, right? Because ego, I think, to me, is the inability to hear negative feedback, right? Like that's how I would kind of define someone's ego, is like they get wrapped up in this particular thing that they believe and they can't like revise it because it's too tied up with themselves. And I would say that, like, look, if you're trying to do something that no one else has done before, there is no space for anyone at the table to have ego. You're all just trying to do the best thing. So you kind of like check that at the door. Very different from confidence, right? I know what we have at Indico and I know what offer that has to someone, right? But it's not that I've got, some crazy ego around it. Like someone says, hey, I don't see, X particular value in that. I'm not going to get all personally offended. I'm going to weigh what they say and, compare it against what I know and see if it's worth updating it. But yeah, I just don't think there's any room for ego in the equation.
And Greg, I'm going to come to you in 1 second to ask what's next. But before, Michelle, I'm just wondering from an investor perspective, that spectrum of ego, how do you interpret that? How does it land on you when you meet different people? How is it a factor in decision making around ego?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a factor, and part of any diligence process, regardless if there's been a CEO swap or not, right, is to get to know the team and understand the dynamics, not just of the CEO, but of the team and how it works and how it functions. And I know you've got a question coming up of what is some of the diligence process that happens when you know that that's happened. And I can go into detail. Slater has experienced it firsthand as part of that process with us. But it all goes back to you're aligned strategically with your investor partners and as a team. And if, to Slater's point, if your ego is if there is an ego and it's driving your inability to hear the board's recommendations, talk through whether if it's required product expansions or pivots or understanding of industries and being able to continue to execute, when the board and the company aren't aligned and that's being driven by ego or CEO's inability to understand maybe where this constructive criticism or advice is coming from, that's usually where you start seeing some of the disconnect and where some of those unfortunate conversations about displacing a CEO versus a CEO opting to step down maybe occur. So there, again, Slater made a great point. There's a difference in being super confident in the solution that you have and the company you're running and what it can do in the industry versus being a bad partner.
Sure. Greg, if you have any comment you want to make on ego before I go back to the question at hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it wasn't so much replacing the CEO or replacing myself. It was really going through an M&A process. But even going through that, I think the key consideration is culture fit. And it definitely starts with the CEO. And so when we were looking for a potential acquirer, we spent a lot of time thinking, is the culture a fit for our people in our business? And it does start with the CEO. So is the CEO a culture fit with the business? Are they going to be a good shepherd for, ultimately our people? I hired every single person. It's important that, we do right by the people. Obviously, there's a business as well. We want to have a good financial return, but at least for me personally, because I didn't raise money, it was really how do we do the right thing for the people? And culture is the main big driver there. Again, I think ego is one consideration, but there's a number of cultural kind of personality considerations in terms of how they steer the ship, how they lead their people, how they grow the business, what are their ethics and integrity that were important considerations.
And just as a quick follow-up, was doing right by your people a motivator for the CEO transition decision that you made? Was that one of the top things you were thinking about, or was it less so?
Yeah, I mean, it was, for me personally, the company had gone through some ups and downs, and, it was like companies, startups need growth, they need trajectory, they need consistency. And so we knew for our particular business that there were opportunities that at our scale, we were having trouble kind of capturing. Like I said, we were a $10 to $15 million a year business. We were trying to break into the next tier, and there's a little bit of a gap for us. And so by going through an M&A process, we're able to merge with another company to essentially catapult us over the chasm that we were having trouble getting over. So I think it was definitely a key consideration.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I'd like to ask Jennifer first, and then Michelle some questions from the investor side. Starting with you, Jennifer, if there's any, how do you know that maybe a CEO might need to step down or might want to step down? Are there indicators? Are there signs? What you could help us through the thought process of how you become aware of that. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think managing a team of a very close-knit group of people versus managing a team of 200 plus people are just different skill sets. And so it really depends on, does that person want that job first? I think that Greg hit the nail on the head by saying there's this large emotional consideration of, this is my baby, and that can go either way. And we try to be really intentional on the boards that I sit on of pushing that conversation to the forefront so that it's not a surprise. Like Slater said, all of a sudden, I think I should be something else. Surprising any of your team with that kind of a decision, I think, can be really anxiety inducing for everyone. And so we try and have proactive conversations around what areas do you need to fill in order to manage a larger team, and are you proactively seeking those? What do we see that's working and not working? And then also, who else is on that founding team that may round out that skill set or not? If it's a really similar founding team, we find that we're intervening much sooner to balance out those skill sets.
And as a micro follow-up really quickly, how do you make those conversations land in the right way so that's not, just the kind of scary, intimidating, you're not doing your job, this is coming soon, versus a motivating thing? I'm not sure what the intention is, but how do you make it land the right way when you have a conversation like that?
I think a good VC unpacks a lot of the traditional relationship, as Michelle's firm does as well, between founder and VC, because holding someone financially accountable at a quarterly meeting, if that's how you're managing your team, that's not good management to begin with. So we try to walk the walk of what we're asking for from our founders and be transparent about what we're seeing. and concerns or questions early. We often share a lot of what we wrote in our memo with them at the onset to say, here's what we're looking at over the next 2 years for follow-on capital, and make that always part of the conversation. And also, it's a two-way street. We expect that feedback from them as well as VCs, because we're intentionally trying to grow our firm as well and get better at our job. And so it's not just a top-down board meeting conversation in a very formal setting. It's a consistent conversation over time where we're talking about how we're all trying to grow.
Great. Michelle, so the question, just going back a second, was about the indicators that it might be time for a CEO to make a transition. How do you know? What do you look at that guides you in that evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, it differs. Again, every situation is different, but I think Sennifer hit a big part of what my same answer would be, is that you're really looking at the dynamics of that manager with their team, and then how you feel that they're running the business, right? Do they have blinders onto certain elements of the business because they're hyper-focused and very experienced in a different side? Are there skill sets that we as a board feel they need to keep hiring for to build on, and if that's the case, then maybe your skill set's better somewhere else. And as Jennifer said, those conversations should not be a surprise that happen on a board call with a Zoom window of people looking at you kind of sternly and saying you didn't hit this. Why not? It should be, we're investors, we're on boards, where we've built a relationship and a rapport, right? It sounds like, Jennifer, you have a very similar model where we're having one-on-one clients, just like, how's it going conversations between board calls and between, kind of the download of financial performance on a regular basis, to make sure that we are true partners, and that anything that, we saw this in the board meeting and it would be really great if we could do this, or what do you think about this, or how are you feeling about the team dynamics? Do we need to get you more resources? Are you feeling comfortable? How's this new product launching going for you? We're there to help support, right? And so it should never feel like we're the big bad investor that's coming in to try and shake things up, right?
Yeah. And then I think also, Michelle, to piggyback on your point, we have a really diverse team, and that helps deliver news. I'm sure that Michelle has run into this before, where sometimes if news comes from us, it might be received differently than if it comes from a team member. And so we also select the best person to work on that with that founder, so that it's a relationship and it's not just, again, a board dynamic.
Yeah. So thank you, Michelle and Jennifer. Greg and Slater, have you been the recipient of a conversation like this? Did it land in the positive way that it was intended? Just want to hear if there's any anecdotal on that. If not, I can move to the next question.
I don't know that this mentality of VCs showing up and being like, you're a bad CEO. I don't think that happens. I don't think that's ever happened. Certainly it's never happened to me. I don't think so. I don't think that's how it works, I guess.
Yeah. I've been part of board meetings where there's definitely some, I'll call it tension or dysfunction between board members and the CEO. And to the points earlier, I think it's important that that CEOs and board members are building their relationship and building their trust so that they can deliver both good news and bad news. It really has to be a relationship. The board meetings are kind of a moment in time, but the real work happens outside of those, right? It's the running of your business and understanding the financials and setting expectations. And a good CEO will manage up to the board in the same way that the board will manage and work with the CEO as well, just to set expectations. At the end of the day, both the board and the CEO, they're both incentivized for the same thing. They want the company to be successful. And so whether it's good news or bad news, it's about creating that relationship and honesty to have those difficult conversations, and to be self-reflective as a CEO that sometimes you screwed up, and sometimes there's a better way to do things, and sometimes recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses. I think that's an important thing. And again, I think not being the CEO is certainly one card that can be played, but there are other things that boards and CEOs can do to bring in help, resources to either untangle a situation or help course correct it.
Zach, One thing to add to what Greg was just saying, I know the topic here is the CEO role, but this happens across any of the management roles, right? At a company, it could be that the CEO is having challenges with maybe their chief marketing officer or head of sales, right? And there are challenges there, and that CEO will look to the board for advice or input, and vice versa. The board should be asking, how are you feeling about this? Like, talk about the dynamic. So it really should be a collaborative approach, and it's not just at the CEO level. It could be at any major level that's driving the company forward.
I was going to say too, yeah, I completely agree with that. Unless you're reading TechCrunch, like, the CEO is not actually the god of the startup. It's like 5 people all working really hard. and I think my lived experience is much closer to Slater's lived experience, where the opposite is usually true, where everyone who has extensive board experience is incredibly cognizant of the importance of that room going well and the effect that you can have on people's lives and jobs with the decisions that you make. And so in my lived experience, it's almost like the opposite is true, that everyone doesn't want to switch out the CEO because we want to give everyone every possible chance to succeed in the role that they want to be in. And there's this weird fear of like change of like, what does it look like? That's not really always grounded in reality.
Before I ask my next question, if there's any input from the audience in the Q&A, we would love to hear from you. Your perspectives and feedback are really valuable, so feel free to chime in. I'll be paying attention to that. And going back to Jennifer and Michelle to ask you a little bit about, what is the decision-making process like if there is a decision that the CEO should be removed? How does that process start? What's involved in it? How does it conclude? We'd really like to hear about that.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, Jennifer, and just give kind of a high level. I think when it does occur, it's not something, I think as Jennifer just mentioned, right? It's not something that anyone really wants, right? It's usually a last option, and it kind of becomes the decision of do we do this and maybe things continue to progress poorly, or is this bad option the best remaining option for us to make for the company? It's I would say it's never, at least as minority investors, right? It's never a single firm or a single decision. It's always very collaborative across the board. Obviously, it hopefully doesn't come as this huge out of nowhere surprise. Like, there should be indicators going through, and however you're measuring performance, right, and relationships there. I think Slater talked about this very much in the beginning. It does usually cause anxiety, and there's usually some sort of moving a bit backwards or question, a hiccup in maybe some of the value and the progress that's made, because you do have to stop and reevaluate and reassess, and then you do have to spend the time to find the right fit. So, as it shouldn't be a single decision. It comes with a lot of thought and time, and ultimately, we all have a responsibility to the company. That's the goal, is the company's success.
Absolutely.
If it happens quickly, it's usually coming from the PR team, not the board. And it's very rare.
So I'd actually like to really jump to my last question, just in service of time. And then again, please share your thoughts in the Q&A if you have them. But my last question is more reflecting on this conversation, kind of a two-parter. One is, did you, as our panelists, did you hear anything that was new to you, that was something that was said by another panelist, something that you felt was new, to you? And the second part of that is there a key message that you think a founder or early stage startup should have heard from this discussion? Was there anything that was new to you, or is there a key message that you'd like to emphasize from the discussion?
I think maybe a key message. I don't know. I wasn't extremely shocked. I think we had similar messages on a lot of these points. But I think one of the things that I would really like to emphasize is, yes, it does sometimes make sense. This is sometimes the right decision. And I think, I would say specifically to a founder is, you are actually the person in the best position to make that decision, right? It's actually really, really messy and usually not a good way for things to work if like the board is like forcing this decision on the company. Like I won't say it never happens, but that's not really a good situation. And I would say, you know, as a founder, if you do feel confident that that is the right move, I would really trust your belief on that, but also recognize that it's not a trivial, simple thing that you're talking about. It's a really, really big, significant, you know, altering event, and you've got to do it right or not at all.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that, you know, especially in early stage startups where maybe it's just yourself solo working on something and an idea, or maybe it's a couple folks. Recognize your skill set and the things that you're good at. You know, be clear about the things that you're not good at. I had a great discussion earlier this week with an engineer, had a brilliant idea, had prototyped it, built it. And he was like, I don't think I enjoy anything about business. I love building cool and interesting tech and hardware. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like that is your life's calling. You should go do that. Not everyone needs to be the CEO. And so you kind of recognize your strengths and weaknesses. And whether or not you decide to be the CEO, look for people to compliment you. And so if you're good, you know, I use the Apple and Microsoft, like you can be the marketer, you can be the Steve Jobs, you know, find yourself a Wozniak, or maybe you're the Bill Gates, you know, find yourself a Steve Ballmer, someone who's going to bang down the doors and get you the contracts and get you the deals. And there's lots of examples around that. That's one of the reasons why lots of investors like the founder co-founder matching, because it's really about whoever the founder being cognizant and aware that they have gaps in their skill sets and recognizing and seeking out people who complement those. I think those are the types of leaders that are long-term more successful. It's one of the things I think is looked at, and those dynamics help you sort out like, hey, who's really showing the acumen for leadership and business and some of the other things that is typically a CEO role.
Great. We have about a minute each and really want to hear from both of you. So Senator, if you'd like to go first.
Echo definitely to all of that. And I think if you can really think about where that vision of success is coming from for you personally, and then come up with a vision of success for the company and unify your team around that, it becomes a really clear decision of, am I serving that shared vision of success, or am I better serving that shared vision of success somewhere else? And if you can do that work up front, you can save a lot of really tricky conversations with your co-founders and your friends and your investors later, because then it's not a big surprise when something is or isn't a fit. And I agree with what Gregory said, but I would also like to point out that they did bring in a woman as the CEO of Yahoo to turn that one around. So think about diversifying your company, not just in skill set, but in terms of the background of who you're hiring, and it'll serve you better in the long run.
Thank you. And Michelle, please.
Yeah, Senator was spot on. I think I agree with Slater. We all kind of came with maybe similar thoughts on this topic. I think the takeaway would be, as a CEO, you're not on an island, right? You shouldn't feel like you're on an island. You should have a support system and other people with you. And if you're questioning things or not concerned, it is collaborative and it is a partnership that you're in. And so don't feel like you have to make the decisions unilaterally, that you can't rely on other people around you for support. And again, that's another signal of the type of leader and manager you would be if you do leverage that network around you to do what's ultimately best for the business. Wonderful.
So those are the questions that we had discussed, and now there's a couple questions from the audience I'd like to invite. One here from Raymond. Can you provide some examples of how you successfully identified the right team for your startup?
Got a view on this one. It actually, I think it goes a lot to making sure that you're starting the company at the right time. It's one of the things that was really great for Indico. We were founded out of college, and I basically just asked all the smartest people I knew, like would you join? So it was actually very, very simple from that perspective. And then we used to have this motto, always escalate. So then at a certain point, you shift from just the smartest people you know to, you ask the smartest people you know who the smartest people they know are, right? And then eventually you find your way to some really good folks. Yeah, I don't know. I think that if you miss that college window of opportunity, you do have to build that network out professionally. It can take a lot longer, but I would just say be really, really cognizant of where you are going to work in the interim if you don't have kind of a team that you think you can build at the moment.
Yeah, and I want to open the question up not just from people who have done it, but Michelle or Jennifer, if you have perspective, it's very valid. Would love to hear it, and Gregory, of course, would love to hear yours as well. If you guys would like to share it.
I think one of the perspectives I'll bring is based on how our firm is structured and the fact that we run industry specific funds, and because of that, a lot of the technology solutions we're investing in are looking to sell into industries where we have just career expertise in, and so a lot of that is finding out if you need a head of sales, or who's in our network, who do we know has experience, who can articulate the needs of your customer based on what you're selling. And so for us, it's a lot of times trying to work with our companies to understand what's the skill set you need, and then how can we be helpful to bring you the right type of candidate, even if it's just a mentoring where you're getting to know some of the experiences to then hone in on who the right fit is for you. So there is, just to Slater's point of who do you know and who do they know, there's a little bit of who's in the network that you can just get some solid advice from as well.
Yeah, one thing I would add is that my first job out of college, I worked at Microsoft, and it gave me kind of a little bit of a perspective of what a top company, what level they hire at. One of the challenges early stage startups have is that they don't necessarily have a lot of context beyond the people in their immediate network of what kind of a world-class, whether it's an engineer, designer, finance person, whatever, looks and behaves like. And so I would encourage a lot of early stage startups to just have a lot of conversations with top people, asking for mentors for advice, going to various events, whether online or in person, and looking for a sense of what that output from a world-class person looks like will help you identify that in your own searches. I employ a thing called behavioral interviewing, where kind of when you're interviewing a candidate, you're really asking them for what are their behaviors or examples when they've actually done certain things that you're looking for. And that's another shortcut for seeing that type of behavior and output in the wild.
Also, if you don't have that network, you can budget for it. You can hire it. And so a really good recruiter for a C-level role is about $100,000 a placement. You can put it into your budget. And if that exceptional person who has that background is a priority for you, you have to find a way to get to them. And if you didn't happen to major in engineering at Stanford or something like that, you have to go find them. And there are people that have that network, and you can budget for it as part of the cost of your startup. I think a mistake that we see a lot of founders doing is trying to, Slater, it worked for a while, but like trying to hire from college or trying to hire from those really immediate networks. And then you end up with people that are very similar to yourself trying to sell into a wildly different market. And have a really clear vision of what you want that team to be, and start building trust in the communities that you need to recruit from to build that team.
Wonderful. So there's another question from Devin, and this is about the due diligence process and from a VC perspective. So I'd like to put that to our panel here. What are the key things you're looking at from a diligence perspective as a VC, given the companies are just starting out?
Proof of performance is a big one that a lot of VCs touch on in different ways, but it can look like 100 different things. So I just worked with a really great salesperson that's an amazing surfer. And so I knew that they had the base skill set to be able to implement something that was wildly outside of their comfort zone, and the discipline to show up on the bad days. And so really we look for the ability to it's like running a marathon. It's not a sprint where you have to do like a really good job at something for 3 months and then you can crash out. So we look for, at somewhere on that founding team, that base skill set of the endurance of sticking with something for a really long time. And we also look for diversity.
I think everything Jennifer said is spot on, and just from a not being very specific but high level, as you know, what we look for is we're looking at the team. You know, when you're an early stage company, you're investing in the people and what you believe that they're capable of and what they're capable of building. More from just the stepping back on the business, you know, especially if you're an early company, are you able to really clearly articulate what you're offering, what your solution is, what you're building? How do you consider why is it differentiated from other things in the space? Just a clear understanding of the market, and that it's more than it's got the idea, and that you've got some strong conviction in why it would be successful, I think. So all goes back to being able to articulate what you're building, the vision for the company, and why you're the right person to lead it.
As maybe a touch of an additional perspective, I'm an EIR as well at 406, so I do technical diligence on a lot of very early stage companies. What I look for primarily is technical founders' ability to be realistic about what they have built, what they will build, and be honest with an investor about that, because it's fine. I think as someone who has gone through that, and most folks are going to call in for technical diligence will understand you're not a $20 million company, right? But what they won't understand is if you're kind of playing, hide the cheese, so to speak, with, what exists and what still hasn't been built.
Those are not fun meetings when that happens.
They can be really infuriating. I would say it's a much better technique to just like assume the person doing diligence knows what they're doing and they understand what they talk about, and just be, as open as you're comfortable being. And I'd maybe also just, one quick thing to what Jennifer was saying, try not to build a college network that is highly heterogeneous. I certainly did not, go to Stanford engineering or anything like that. I actually, went to an engineering school that's got a 50-50 gender ratio. So that was tremendously helpful at Olin College. But, then in addition, right, like understand that your network is not just the college you're at, right? It's also Wellesley that was nearby and Babson that was nearby. That's a business school, right? So you've got so much more outside of your bubble that you can draw on even early on. Right. So, really force yourself to go outside of the immediate network.
Yeah, just to add on the diligence front, I think there's a couple things that startups should be expecting to provide, even early stage companies. Techstars is an investor in many early stage companies. And I always say it's not, we're an accelerator. We're not a 3-month relationship or a 10-year relationship. And so we ask founders to just tell us the truth about your business, because ultimately we're going to find out anyways. And if we're going to find out after the fact, it's actually going to be bad for everyone. And so, we'll look at your articles of incorporation, we'll look at your documents, we'll look at your financials. If you have financials, we'll look at how you're spending money and how you're forecasting. We'll just pressure test it. Like, does this seem reasonable? Are you being upfront and truthful with us? Do the numbers make sense? And if, are there things that we can poke holes at? Does something feel weird or off? And if it does, can you offer a reasonably good explanation in terms of what and why? Again, early stage, you're not going to have a ton of, revenue recognition and quality of earnings or other things like that. You see some of that in later stage diligence, but it's really, what's the team look like? What's the background? What are some of the basics around the finances and the forecasts? And does it make sense?
I will say, you do have to provide at least some level of conscientiousness around, because I will say, you see founders all the time. It's just like, oh, we don't have finances, we're a startup, right? We don't have tests, we're a startup. Like, no, cut that out. At your stage, absolutely, right? There's different levels that are required, but even at the very earliest pre-seed stage, right? It's not an excuse to leave all that stuff by the wayside. But you know, again, do what's appropriate, and 0 is never appropriate.
Slater, could you unpack act your stage for us a little bit?
Oh yeah, actually, gosh, sorry, this is like a Techstarsism. I don't remember who said it first, right? But you know, it's this notion of act your stage is recognize that, you know, whether you're a seed stage company or a Series A company or a Series B company, the problems you have are very, very different, right? And the things that you have to solve are very, very different. And the level of sort of conscientiousness and diligence you have to have around the pieces of your business are also different, right? And it's both about recognizing that there's always another level, right? There's, for any problem in your business, right, there's going to be another level of scale, another level of efficacy, like another level of protection you wish that you had. But, you know, it's something to really help you guide that really brutal prioritization, right? And, you know, you're building out a tech feature, right? You know, it's some sense of, you know, how MVP should this be? Right? Like, you're a seed stage company, right? You should be hacking stuff out in weeks, shipping the absolute bare minimum because you're in that mode, right? Like us, we were a Series B company selling into the Fortune, you know, 100. You can't do that anymore, right? Like, you need a real process and an actual, you know, established SDLC, and, you know, like, there's certifications and stuff. But if we did that when we were a seed stage company, we would, you know, die in paperwork before we got our first customer. So.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So there's a moment here for a final word, and I'll just make a comment. I'm hearing a lot of the messaging about kind of knowing yourself, knowing your ability to drive success because you know yourself so well. And I think we all seem to agree on similar points around that. Correct me if I'm wrong if we don't. But the counterpoint would be maybe people don't know you well enough to tell you what to do, and maybe you should resist. Kind of, if that's the counterpoint, because I want to bring a different kind of point of view in here. So the takeaway I'm hearing is really knowing yourself, knowing where you add value, knowing how you generate the most results for your people, for your organization, and yourself, and that by being true in this way, you can add the most value. That's kind of the final point from my perspective. But I'd love to, as we conclude with just 2 minutes left, invite you guys to any final point or observation you wish to share.
I think yes, but don't get caught in that catch-22 of like self-awareness is also a skill. And if you're not good at it, well, you know, maybe you can't recognize it in yourself. So, but it's not always people don't know you well enough to tell you what to do. Sometimes people do. Sometimes someone outside can see it a little more clearly.
Awesome. Well, I really thank you guys for just a spirited and honest discussion that went under the hood a little bit, and it felt very real to me. And I think we've touched upon some important themes, and I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you so much, and for all those who asked great questions.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists. I really appreciate you guys volunteering your time and sharing your insights with the startup scene. So thank you guys so much again. And to the attendees watching, we are going to go on a lunch break, but we'll be back in like an hour. So you can definitely tune in for those next sessions. We have a lot of good ones coming up. So definitely click agenda at the top to view them. And I will see you in an hour. So thank you guys so much and have a good one.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.